I want to talk about a game that is just as fun, well-designed, and crazy now as it was back when it first released 18 years ago. I am, of course, referring to Metroid Prime. Super Monkey Ball 2. Describing Super Monkey Ball is easy to do. There's a monkey and a ball, a stage to tilt, and a goal to tilt the ball into. Games like Kirby Air Ride advertise that you can play them with only one button, but Monkey Ball takes the Galaxy Brain route of not having any buttons, only the control stick to tilt the stage with. Despite its simplicity, these games have insane amounts of depth. The controls are tight and levels are filled with varied obstacles, offering a million different interactions in unique situations. It's a series of intricate challenges that gets absolutely ridiculous by the end, always looking for another way to impress and test you. The perfect mix of precise movement and flexible design, Monkey Ball is a masterclass in making the most out of a simple concept, and I'm about to tell you why. That said, I'm mainly going to be focusing on Monkey Ball 2 in this video, although many points can apply to 1 as well. Both 1 and 2 are classics that are worth your time, but I want to focus on how 2 differs from 1 in both subtle and not so subtle ways, so I'll begin by discussing 2's general level design philosophy. When you start a level in Monkey Ball 1, you will generally look at the level and then think, I need to get to the goal through this method. Monkey Ball 2 is different in that when you start a stage, your first thought will often instead be, I need to figure out how to get to the goal, and then I need to get to the goal by using that method. This extra step is what makes many of the levels in 2 so engaging, because it's about solving a puzzle and then applying your own skill to execute the solution, rather than being about raw execution alone. This isn't a commentary about which design philosophy is better than the other, they both have specific intentions and appeals, but for me, 2's philosophy clicks much more. One thing about 2's level design that I think is really well done is how it manages to make repeated playthroughs remain interesting. If these puzzles were strictly linear with only a single possible execution of the solution, it would become dull to constantly replay them. It clashes with the idea of Monkey Ball being designed around replayability, and you would then be asking why these levels have puzzle elements at all. 2 gets around this by making sure the execution barrier remains engaging, while also ensuring the puzzles are creative, open-ended, or have inherent depth to them. An example of this is the level Free Throw. In this stage, the goal is suspended sideways on a pole, mimicking a basketball hoop. The obvious question here is, how do I get into the goal? And the solution is to stand on a launcher that will fling you into the air, forcing you to steer yourself into the goal as you fall down. Figuring out how to reach the goal is the puzzle, flinging yourself into the air is the solution, and steering yourself into the goal is the execution barrier. It's a simple puzzle on its own, but there's more to it keeping it interesting. First, there's actually 3 different goals placed in different areas. The second goal is placed behind the first, and the third behind the second. These extra goals not only offer you more points for your score, but will warp you ahead to different levels depending on the goal. Goal 1 precedes you 1 level, Goal 2 precedes you 2, and Goal 3 precedes you 3. Because each extra goal is harder to reach than the last, you have to consider whether you're capable of executing these feats for the best result. There are some other nice touches to the level as well. The poles are placed low, allowing you to bounce into a goal instead of having to make a perfect shot. The launcher is fairly large, which means there is a sizable range of different throw distances depending on where you stand. It also opens up the opportunity for running onto the launcher at different speeds instead of just standing, allowing even more freedom in the trajectory you are launched at. The concept of the level is also thrilling on its own, so even when you're a master, it remains enjoyable to be flying through the air at such high speeds. All of these combined with everything else make for a level that is dynamic, flexible, and has depth. You are not challenged on whether you have discovered the solution, you are tested on your understanding of the solution. The easiest way to iterate on this point is to look at a level that does the opposite, Switch Inferno. This stage has 64 different switches placed in an 8x8 layout with the goal being hidden. 30 of these switches will activate the left wall of the level and knock you off the stage, or onto a lower elevation if you're reasonably lucky, 30 will activate the other wall, and 4 will cause the goal to briefly appear at the edge of the stage. Activating a switch of any type will highlight every other switch with the same function, so the solution is to press a left wall switch, then press a right wall switch, memorize any of the 4 switches that don't become highlighted, and then press one of those 4 switches on your next attempt to open the goal. Figuring out which button to push is the puzzle, pushing one of the 4 switches is the solution, and running into the goal before it becomes hidden again is the execution barrier. The elements are all there, but the level itself is a mess on nearly every front. The puzzle is notoriously obtuse due to the fact that there's no reason to make the connection that there are dedicated switches for each wall, and that pressing one type would highlight the others, making it extremely common for players to assume that there's no explicit connection between the switches that are highlighted. The solution is too linear and has no extra variables. Your position, angle, or speed has no effect, because you either press the correct switch or you don't. The execution barrier is also too low to be interesting, as making a beeline for the goal is a simple task that doesn't require knowledge of the mechanics. All of these factors together will lead to the average player burning through their lives to try every switch on the field without needing to understand the puzzle itself. Alternatively, they will simply look up the solution instead, and because the execution barrier has no correlation with said solution, they will finish the level without ever realizing what they were actually supposed to do. It does not test them on their understanding of the solution the same way that well-designed levels like Free Throw do. In the end, even when you know the trick, it's just not an enjoyable stage. It's worth mentioning that not all stages in Monkey Ball 2 follow the puzzle, solution, and execution design philosophy. Usually the further into the game you get, the more complex the levels will become, but there are many stages based on pure execution as well. They never feel too similar to anything in the first game, however, and still contain plenty of skips and tricks available to tackle stages in cool ways. There also seems to have been a shift to more levels with bigger or longer spaces, offering more opportunities for speed and good use of momentum. 8 Bracelets is a great example of a fantastic execution-based level. In this stage, there are 8 rings that are linked together, and you have to make it across at least 5 of the rings to reach the goal. Although the rings are connected, they spread out into different directions, and you have to roll out of one ring to get to another. The idea is that you are having to roll down a ring to build momentum, and once you reach the top, you swerve out of the ring into the next. You then go downhill again until you're back at the top, and repeat. It's a sick test of mid-air control and retaining momentum, and there's even additional goals depending on how high you can reach while on the last ring. It's slick, challenging, and it always feels rewarding to beat it. One addition in particular that spices up the gameplay are the toggleable switches. This was mentioned during the portion about Switch Inferno, but Monkey Ball 2 introduces switches that you can stand on to activate various functions, affecting the speed of moving parts, turning said moving parts on or off, and so on. Aside from offering some neat puzzles, they also serve an interesting purpose in the execution-based levels, difficulty modifiers. Monkey Ball 1 had different versions of mini stages, with them being harder or easier depending on which challenge mode difficulty you were on. The issue with this is it caused some stages to not feel very unique anymore, because you could finish the level and then encounter it again on the next difficulty. 2 doesn't do this, but it offers a pretty clever way of doing something similar without directly repeating levels. In some stages you would drop directly onto a switch that speeds up moving parts in that level, with another switch being placed behind you that slows those parts back down. It's still possible to beat the level when it's sped up, it's just more difficult. In other words, the level is in its hardest variation by default, but you're given the option to make it easier, which allows there to be multiple variations of the same level without repeats across difficulties. Although it isn't difficult to hit the slowdown switch, it does take time that you may not feel like wasting. It's small, but it does still feel like an interesting idea that adds to the game. Another mechanic 2 introduces are the teleporters, which will warp you to another part of the stage. While these aren't as much of a game changer as the switches are, they're still a cool inclusion that adds to the complexity of the level designs. Their best feature is their ability to retain your momentum when going through them, which makes for great levels like Charge, where the idea is to keep going through 2 teleporters repeatedly until you build up enough speed to launch yourself over to the goal. I do think the teleporters could have been pushed much further if they were used in conjunction with switches more often, but I still like them. On another note though, if there is one nitpick I have about how challenge mode is handled in this game, it would be some of the level placements. The structure of challenge mode is basically the same as the first title, but the difficulty itself is nowhere near as consistent. Arthropod has no reason being in advanced when it's harder than some master stages, Domes is a huge difficulty spike that would feel more at home in Expert Extra, Detour has no business being nearly halfway through Expert with how easy it is, and so on. It's not a giant problem, and 1 wasn't perfect with it either, but I would have appreciated if some of these levels were swapped around instead of being in their current positions. One small touch about challenge mode that I do really love though is how the difficulties themselves are set up. The earlier stages tend to be the simplest ones so that they can properly teach you the basic controls and mechanics, and as a result these also end up being the least interesting levels. Both Monkey Ball 1 and 2 subvert this issue by making Beginner an extremely short difficulty and Expert the longest. This means that for most of the game, the designers get to experiment with creative and challenging levels, and I know that having a difficulty curve isn't this groundbreaking new feature. My point is that this setup means the designers get to squeeze all they can out of the game's potential, because they have enough faith that players will be able to handle whatever is thrown at them. With that in mind, there's an interesting addition into, which is the ability to purchase extra starting lives for challenge mode using currency. The first game only allowed you to carry 3 lives by default, but here you are able to buy lives until your starting number is 99. At first it may seem like this would make accessing the extra stages too easy, but it's not nearly as broken as it sounds. 2 by design forces experimentation and multiple attempts in trying to solve its puzzles, so deaths are going to be inevitable. Giving you several more safety nets makes the process of solving these puzzles much more fair than they would be otherwise, and there's still plenty of challenge even with 99 lives. The new story mode helps you learn the stages as well. Story mode is essentially challenge mode but split into 10 worlds with 10 levels each, and you're given infinite lives to tackle each level one by one. This is extremely useful for new players still learning the mechanics, and it allows them to understand the puzzles before encountering them in the mode with higher stakes. It's a smart addition, and there's even a whole set of levels exclusive to this mode in the final world. I don't think they're as well designed or polished as the rest of the game, but it's a good bonus that offers nice incentive to check the mode out. The cutscenes are also kind of absolutely terrible, but I love them. 10 out of 10 inclusion. Also, I know this has nothing to do with mechanics or level design or whatever, but I think it'd be a waste not to talk about 2's minigames available in a separate mode. The first game had 6 minigames of its own, and 2 manages to double that amount while bringing back the original ones and even remaking them with new modes and stages. It's pretty common for a lot of games to have some throwaway minigames that aren't worth touching more than once, but 2 actually has some shockingly fun diversions, just like with 1. These aren't the next Mario Party or anything, but many of them are genuinely addicting. Like with the rest of the game, 2's minigames tend to be more ambitious this time around too. My favorite of these is Monkey Shot, a surprisingly fleshed out on-rail shooter with 3 stages, several power-ups, and full-on boss fights. It's incredible how much content Monkey Ball 2 has, because it could have included just the 150 main levels, and I don't think anyone would have complained. To nitpick just a few more things for the sake of being pedantic before ending this video, there's a few other levels that I wish had a bit more polish. Conveyors, triangle holes, and quick turn in particular are most easily completed by simply holding up at the start of the level, and this works with 100% consistency, which defeats the point of actually playing the game. I'm assuming this is an oversight, but it feels like a waste of 3 stages with alright ideas. I will say that in general you can make the argument that Monkey Ball 2's levels tend to be less consistent in quality than 1's, and I can't say I'd be able to totally disagree. There's very few levels off the top of my head in 1 that I'd call outright bad, but there's definitely multiple levels in 2 that feel like they should have been reworked. Like I've been mentioning before though, 2 still makes up for this by having so many highs, and a large number of those highs end up being even higher than in 1. It presents challenge after challenge meant to engage and reward anyone willing to improve themselves, with a genuine warmth to it and encouraging atmosphere that welcomes all kinds of players. Basically, it's really good and you should play it. Super Monkey Ball 2 is an excellent game that is masterful at intertwining depth and simplicity. I hope that this video was able to convey some of the reasons I find it so amazing, because it deserves more recognition and I highly recommend it. Thank you for watching, have a great day, etc, goodbye.